Well, good morning, everyone. This is Jim Fox with remote.it. Thanks for joining the webinar today, where I'm going to talk to you about the two connection types we offer here at remote.it. These are proxy and P2P, or as we like to say, peer-to-peer. I'll explain how they work and the differences or advantages of each type and answer any questions you have along the way. You'll have a chance to type any questions into the Q&A chat bar for the Zoom call, and I'll take those at the end. So if you, at any point during the webinar, you have a question, go ahead and type that in and we'll answer all those at the end for you. This webinar does not really require a lot of prerequisite knowledge at all. If you've used remote.it before from the web portal or from one of our native desktop apps, then I think you'll be able to follow everything I'm doing during the demonstrations and during the webinar conversation. So let's go ahead and talk about proxy connections. Usually when people get started with remote.it, this is the first type of connection they make from the web portal. In this scenario, we have user over here on their computer, usually with a browser at first, and they want to connect to this remote device at some edge network. That device would have to be equipped with remote.it, of course. So remote.it's installed, maybe that's a Raspberry Pi or a Windows machine, a Mac, anything that can run the remote.it desktop or agent. And on this side, the user would be using a browser on their computer to connect to the remote.it web portal to initiate that connection. So a little background on proxy. All connections that are initiated through a web browser will be the proxy type. And that's just because the remote.it software is only installed on one endpoint. This endpoint over here is using a browser. There's no custom software on that machine whatsoever. So that's going to require a proxy type remote.it connection. As soon as the user selects a device from her device list and a service to connect to, the remote.it backend up here will spin up a proxy server to host that connection. First thing the proxy does is make sure it can connect to the remote device over this path. And once that's established, it will generate the proxy URL from one of our global proxy servers and present that proxy URL to the user in their browser, so they can then copy paste that into the proper client software application. Meaning if this user is trying to connect VNC or Windows RDP, remote desktop, SSH, whatever the case, they'll need to copy paste that proxy URL into the proper client software application that can use it. So let me show you what that looks like. And maybe many of you have seen this before, but I'll just go ahead and do a quick connection. So this is browser-based, so I'm going to open a browser here, sign into my remote.it account. And once I'm into the remote.it web portal, I'll see my device list, of course, and I can choose a device to connect to. Let's connect to this. This is a Raspberry Pi I have set up on a remote network, and we'll try VNC, so a remote desktop to that machine. So right now, the remote.it backend is setting up a proxy server. It gave me a URL. I'm just going to copy that. And then I have to paste that into the proper client software application. So I'm using the real VNC Connect app here. And now I need to enter the credentials for the Pi itself. And lo and behold, there we have a Pi desktop on a remote machine. So that's a typical proxy connection. You can see it's pretty responsive. The data connection is flowing through the remote.it proxy server, but as I'm scrolling through the menus here, I'm getting good response. It's entirely usable. A little more background for you on that type of connection, proxy connection. The URLs that are generated, that URL I copy pasted, that will now be good for 8 hours, and then it will expire. And I'll have to get a new one if I want to stay connected or connect again after 8 hours. The reason is The proxies are part of the remote.it shared cloud infrastructure. So those proxy servers are shared amongst hundreds of thousands of users making connections, and they cannot be permanent for that reason. Here's an example of a typical proxy URL. This randomly generated string is a extra security feature that makes it hard to guess a URL for certain types of connections. I believe we do this for the HTTP and TTPS reverse proxies that we offer. Proxy servers from remote.it are geolocated all around the world. There's a few dozen of them, and we'll assign one to make your connection based on proximity to the initiator and the target device and network conditions, how busy are the proxies, and so forth. These proxy connections will also expire if the connection is inactive for, I believe, 15 minutes. So as long as you're using it, it'll stay open for 8 hours. If you go inactive for something like 15 minutes, it will time out. And if you need to reconnect, that's fine. Just start a new one. You'll get a new proxy URL to use. Okay. And again, that's just the nature of the shared cloud infrastructure, where we need to share those among multiple users. And I just wanted to mention that we are working on a new feature so users can associate a client software application, like I use the Real VNC VNC viewer application there. So I could associate that with VNC type connections and then auto launch that app from my computer here when I make that connection to eliminate that copy paste operation. That's a little bit of a burden on the user right now for proxies. So that's something that will be coming in the future. The second type of connection we offer is known as P2P or peer-to-peer. And this connection is a direct connection over the internet between the two endpoints. So again, we have a user over here who wants to connect to a remote network or a device on a remote network over here in the lower right corner. And the difference here is remote.it is now installed on both endpoints. So in that first case with the proxy, I just used a browser. I had no custom software on this machine whatsoever. But for a peer-to-peer, I need to have remote.it on both ends. So I'll use on this end, on the initiator side, I'll use either one of the remote.it desktop apps for Windows, Mac. We have some Linux builds. You can contact us if you have a Linux machine you want to use for initiating peer-to-peers. Or you could use our mobile app, iOS, Android. Either way, on the initiator side, you'll have the remote.it software, so we can now make a peer-to-peer. And as I said, peer-to-peers are always initiated through a machine that has remote.it software on it. We need remote.it software on both endpoints in order to execute a peer-to-peer connection. Now, the back end is still involved. It's not a proxy server, and the data connection does not flow through remote.it proxy servers whatsoever, but the back end is only involved in connection setup. When you go ahead and try to make the connection, the back end will authenticate, make sure that this user has the right to connect to that machine, and then send some information to both endpoints to establish a direct connection over the internet that will just route over the internet routers, just like you were using a browser to browse the web. There will be no proxy intermediary server once that connection is established. So let me show you what that's like. I'm sure many of you have used the web portal to make proxy connections, but let me show you what it looks like to make a peer-to-peer connection. And I'll close this back there. So this is the remote.it desktop app for Mac. And I'm running that. I'm already logged in. This is my device list. So let's make the same connection I just made. I believe it was this device. I click the device and now I see the same services, but for peer-to-peer. So I'm going to say VNC. And that connection has now been made. I'm going to grab that URL. And I only have to do that once. I'll show you what I mean. I do have to copy paste it this first time. But once I do it once, the client software is going to remember that, and it's essentially bookmarked, right? It will always work as long as I initiate that connection from this machine. And you can see it's nice and responsive as well. And it should be a little more responsive than a little faster because there's no proxy server, of course, in the data connection path. I can show you, sometimes I like to show, just run a top command and you can see how much CPU and memory remote it's using. It's very small. Look for the command connect D. That's remote it, connect D. And that's using a fraction of percent of memory and 1 or 2% of CPU on a Raspberry Pi. And we're running here, a full remote desktop. So you can see the desktop software itself is using much more CPU than remote it. So let me close that. And I never have to copy paste that again. See, all the client software, whether you're doing RDP, VNC, if you're on Windows using PuTTY for SSH, whatever you're using, you can put that URL, localhost colon 33,000. That's the URL and port number for the peer-to-peer connection. It becomes like a private IP address for you to get to that remote machine over VNC. So you never have to copy paste that again. It's here. And if I just click it, it will reconnect. Okay? And then reestablishes that. And that'll stay open. That does not expire. That's now your private IP address forevermore to VNC on that remote machine. Okay, so a little more on peer-to-peer. Again, these are permanent URLs, private to you. It's not a URL you can give to your friends to use on a different machine. You have to use it from the machine where the remote app was running and you made that connection in the first place. But if you're connecting from the same machine all the time, that's a really nice feature of peer-to-peer, is that those are permanent and functions like a personal private IP address. Again, these are always on. Once connected, you'll never have to, if I close the computer, come back tomorrow, reconnect, that's still going to be connected until I physically click that button, disconnect. We've also built into these desktop apps the ability to fall back to a proxy in the event a P2P cannot be established. There are some network configurations. It doesn't happen very often, but over some cellular networks, if the carrier has a very unique NAT in their data center, a P2P may not be able to connect. So to accommodate for that, we've built a proxy failover or fallback into these desktop apps. So if P2P can't connect, it'll automatically fall back to a proxy. And that's a feature you can turn on or off in the desktop if you don't want to use proxies. Some companies, in very secure, very private applications, just don't want any data in their connections traversing shared cloud proxy infrastructure or any cloud server infrastructure, shared or not. So the peer-to-peer really meets that requirement nicely, because once that connection is established, all data is just routed straight over the internet, encrypted end-to-end between the two endpoints. And the other big advantage of peer-to-peer is that it's really the fastest possible connection you can have over the internet, because it's a direct connection. So the speed is still limited, of course, by how good is the Wi-Fi at both ends, or how good is the cellular data service at both ends or one end. There'll always be a slowest link somewhere in there, but it's not due to a remote proxy server, because there isn't one in the connection path, right? So it's always going to be your fastest connection. And that's good for remote desktop applications or file transfers. If you have to transfer some large files, log files or whatever, you want a faster connection. So I recommend trying these remote desktop apps to get that peer-to-peer capability. Let me talk a little bit side by side, proxy versus P2P. They both have their advantages. Connection speed, as I said, the proxy's good. We used it. That was remote desktop, and the performance was fine. It was totally usable, but I'm on a decent network here. If you're on cellular somewhere and you've got a low data rate, then maybe peer-to-peer would be better. P2P will always be best in terms of connection speed. In terms of ability to connect, proxy is the best we offer. There are situations where P2P won't be able to connect. It's rare, but it does happen. Usually it can happen on a cellular carrier that has I guess, non-standard or non-traditional NAT in the data center, or some different settings on their routers. So if you do attempt a P2P and it won't connect, you can always go to the web portal and try a proxy, and you should be able to connect no problem. The permanent URL, as I mentioned, proxies expire either from inactivity or just duration at 8 hours. P2P is permanent for your use, so it becomes your private IP address to those remote devices. They're both very secure connections. On the proxy connection between the browser and our backend is, of course, HTTPS, SSL, TLS standard web secure connection. And then for those types of connections remotely, for reverse proxies used for HTTP or TTPS, we append that random subdomain to make that URL harder to guess. We also have IP address restrictions in place. You can turn that on or off, but IP address restriction means no one can use your proxy URL unless the connection they're initiating is from the same global IP that you started the connection, okay? So no one can grab that URL or somehow get it off the web and use it unless they're coming from the same global IP that you initiated it. So that's a nice feature. That's the same feature that AWS, Azure use to secure their cloud servers for their customers. On P2P security, it's, again, a private IP address. It won't work for anyone but your remote equipped initiator machine, IP address restricted as well. And both are encrypted end to end. That's the next row here, encrypted end to end. And then the only other difference, and you saw it in the two quick little demos I did there, to initiate connections for proxy, you don't need any custom software on the initiator machine. You just use a web browser, and you have to copy paste the proxy URL into the appropriate client software application. For peer-to-peer, you will need to have remoted on both endpoints, but then that URL is bookmarkable into your client software application. So that makes it very convenient to use. And I just wanted to highlight one area here, connection speed. I did a little setup to show the speed advantage of peer-to-peer versus proxy. I did a little experiment last night. So I have a user over here and a Raspberry Pi remote on a remote network. And that Pi has a 64 megabyte file on it. Not huge, but large enough it could take a little time depending on network conditions. And so I did a file transfer from Pi to my Mac using an SSH or SCP Linux command. And I'll show you the results. I did that file transfer using a remote proxy connection and then using a remote peer-to-peer connection. So here you can see this was my portal view when I got the proxy. And then I used that proxy address in a Linux SCP command, put the port there, the URL, the name of the file, and and the directory I wanted it to download to or pull to on my Mac. And it transferred, and it took 4 minutes and 11 seconds at this average data rate, almost 260 kilobytes per second, to do the transfer with a remote proxy connection. And then I did the same thing over here. I did another command, but using a peer-to-peer connection. So you can see my URL was localhost, my port was 33,001, and that was much faster, right? That was almost 5 megabytes per second. and finished in 13 seconds. So if you're moving big files, or you have a lot of remote desktop sessions going on, or streaming video, video streaming is another one that really helps to have peer-to-peer. So let's go ahead and take some questions. I have a couple here to get us started that we get a lot from people. Why do proxy URLs expire? The answer is, of course, our proxy servers are a shared cloud resource amongst all the remote users. There are peaks. There are times during the day when demand or usage really peaks. And so we need to keep that proxy pool fresh and recycling for all users. So we give a pretty 8 hours is pretty reasonable. Most connections are much shorter than that. And again, it will expire after 15 minutes of inactivity, but you can always just restart it and get a new proxy if you need to continue the work you're doing. Can I get a permanent URL to my remote devices? We do get this question a lot. And I think the answer is yes, the peer-to-peer is a permanent URL for your personal private use. It will never change, and you can bookmark it in whatever client software you're using to make those types of connections. We are considering doing a proxy type static URL or permanent URL, and looking at how to do that, because we get this question a lot. It's not something we have scheduled right now, but we'd like to accommodate that. So we're going to work on that some more. And we're often asked about encryption, for going through a proxy. And of course, yes, the answer is all connections are encrypted end to end, proxy and peer-to-peer. Can the proxy connection use two-factor authentication? This is something that is almost complete. We definitely recognize the need for that. As a supplier of enterprise quality software to large companies, we have a lot of Fortune 500 size companies that use Remote.it, both in proxy and peer-to-peer, and that's a common request. And we actually have a beta version of that up right now. We're testing internally. So I expect to see that in, sooner rather than later, two-factor authentication for the proxy or the web portal login. We have some resources available for you to learn more about Remote.it and keep in touch with us and what we're up to. So take a look there. Thanks again for attending. This is Jim Fox with Remote.it, and have a great day.